Very good afternoon to you. Yeah, thank you. So, after 2 days of strong technical deliberations, I think the time for something which all of us love, the money part, is here. It is important for all of us to really understand what is really going to go, and what is going to really come out in terms of money, because ultimately return is something that really matters for everybody. And as Professor said in his initial remarks on day one, it is important to understand that without ROI nothing works. So, the trend has to be basically towards creating sustainable technologies which are low cost so that we are able to move towards the goal of net zero. At the same time, ensuring that, we produce something which is sustainable, which is long term, and which is good for the humanity. Now, if you look at, some of the targets in terms of net zero or decarbonization which has been set, and the figures are really, really astonishing. If you look at the reports which has come out from McKinsey actually talks about $275 trillion of investment in the next 30 years on decarbonization. Then institution like IEA, India International Energy Agency, actually talks about 150 to 160 trillion dollars. OECD actually talks about a figure of $210 trillion. So if you make an average of all these three, larger institutions, the average would be in the range of around $200 trillion over the next 30 years. So you require something like $7 to $8 trillion every year in terms of investment, hoping that we'll be able to decarbonize, or maybe, as some of the speakers have said, 80% possible decarbonization. So this is the amount of money that is required. So if you require $200 trillion average, you will probably require $50 trillion of equity money, assuming you work in a 25-75 debt equity ratio, because it is not possible for every project to have 100% equity, and that is a trend which has never been there, and most of the corporates will actually not love going beyond 20-25% equity contribution. So looking at all that, in terms of India, we need to look at 20% sort of electric mobility decarbonization. In terms of industrial decarbonization, it is around 80%. So that is the amount of penetration that really needs to happen in India. If you look at some of the commitments towards COP26, which has been announced by Prime Minister, currently we are at 100 gigawatt. We need to go to 500 gigawatt. So the amount of investment required will be, even if you consider 5 crores per megawatt, it will be in the range of 20-25 lakh crores. So the amount of equity investment that is required will be significantly higher. So looking at all these parameters, the amount of investment required is significantly higher. India as a banking system doesn't have too much of deposit base. Mr. Munoz will probably elaborate on that. But the amount of deposit base is probably in the range of 1,250 to 1,300 billion dollars. And that is the amount of money that is available, out of which 20-30% actually goes in various kind of reserves, and the balance money is available for disbursement. But we have not only the energy sector, we have various other sectors also where the money needs to actually go. If you look at the global economy, the size of the global economy is around $80 trillion, out of which around 25-30% actually goes in government turnover, and balance is all private sector, out of which around the free cash flow would not be go beyond 7 to 8%. So the amount of free cash flow that is available is not beyond 3 to 4 trillion dollars, and the amount of investment that needs to be done is around 8 to 10 trillion dollars on an annual basis. So the amount of money required is significantly higher, and all this money basically belongs to shareholders. So the choice belongs to shareholders. Obviously, the sustainability is the real choice for them. So in terms of that, we really need to look forward in terms of really investing that money, and probably forget dividend income or major amount of cash flows going to shareholders in the coming days. So that's the scenario which is actually emerging, and I think we need to really look at it in a very positive way. So different kind of structures need to emerge, and I think that is an area which probably some of the speakers will actually talk about to elaborate on their experience. And to begin with, I would basically request Mr. Jayan Dev, who has been a MD with Indian Energy Exchange, to really talk about how solar and wind financing has happened in the country. At the same time, what kind of revenue streams are possible in terms of various energy sources, how it can be maximized in the coming days. Mr. Jayan Dev, please.
Yes, logged. I'll be sharing some of my experiences with you.
I've been a consultant for a number of years. Now also I'm doing consulting. My group is trying to develop 20 megawatts of solar power in Maharashtra and Gujarat for a private company producing some goods in both the places. And we have tied up with IREDA, almost tied up, for getting the loan. And these loans are, we tried with banks, NBFCs and IREDA. We found IREDA is the best source for the particular project. Now we are considering what kind of module we can have, because there is a separate financer for this, base financer. It is a deferred capex or operating lease. Both the options we are trying to find out as to which is better for the particular party in Maharashtra as well as Gujarat. So several projects are possible with any of these models, and they will work very fast. The most important part is he has talked about financing. Why in India you need to have a separate financing module for the purpose of power or renewable power or anywhere? If you want to put up automobile factory or cement factory or steel factory, no PPAs are asked for. But only in case of power, PPAs are asked for, or some kind of validity is asked for generating revenue streams. The important point here is that the market is not developed for energy sector, electricity sector. Though the Electricity Act 2003, the preamble says market development, but our regulators in the country have not allowed market to develop in the manner the Act envisaged. The important part was that no tariff will be determined for open access consumers, that is 1 megawatt and above consumers, and more consumers were to be put onto the open access route, and there will not be any tariff, and that's why everyone, including the utilities, would be competing with each other, competing with generators, competing with traders, and supplying power. If the market would have been developed, the bankers would have been happy to consider the market and finance this sector separately. But there is a need for revenue now because the market is not developed. How the market, if the market is not developed, what else could be done? I explained to you that loan, equity capital, and yeah. The other part is, sorry, there is exchange. There is a marketplace called Indian Energy Exchange, that's the first exchange in the country, started in 2008, where you can sell conventional electricity, and recently we have started even the green electricity market. This green electricity market, there is a day ahead market, there is a term ahead market. That means few days before you can commit your power, and in case it is not selected for whatever reason, it can be sold in as a conventional power also. You can give your option as to at what price you would sell as green power and as to at what price you would sell as conventional power. So that market is operating, and in case you don't find any buyer or you have surplus electricity, renewable electricity, you can sell it in the market and get your money on daily basis. Partly, this will help you to cover your capital cost. So far the green hydrogen is concerned, recently MNRE has given the draft guidelines for power, the long-term purchase or sale agreement at a fixed price. Unfortunately, private sector is not interested in committing themselves for purchasing on long-term basis because the personal guarantees are involved, corporate guarantees are involved, and they don't want to do it because of the changing business scenario. The only way available is that some renewable energy sector player can have a direct contract with the fertilizer companies, particularly for producing ammonia, and that particular contract can help them. Presently, they are finding it out as to what are the sources for market for RE power. Apart from electricity, hydrogen is another source, and the third source is ammonia arising out of it. Next year onwards, ammonia as a fuel, ships will be available in the world, and those ships will need ammonia as a fuel. Now there is Indian Gas Exchange also started by Indian Energy Exchange, and they are toying and thinking with the idea of generating hydrogen exchange. Hydrogen as a gas can move in the pipeline, specialized pipeline, and that hydrogen can be used by many companies either as storage or as part of the natural gas. Up to 20% hydrogen can be mixed with natural gas pipelines. And there is technology available to extract hydrogen from that natural gas and use it wherever it is required. This is all I wanted to tell you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dev. Your comments on financing of the solar and the wind turbine projects and the maximization of revenue from the exchange side are very, very important for people to really understand. For people to really understand how revenues can be maximized, at the same time how projects can be put up with minimum debt equity ratios. In order to take our discussion ahead, now I would request Mr. Vinod Kumar to really highlight about his experience in terms of Indo-Australia trade pact and the recent agreements between Indian government and the Australian government, and how it can help in terms of maximization of trade, at the same time any financing opportunities, at the same time sourcing of the raw material, because that is something which is very critical for India in terms of the growth of this particular sector. Mr. Vinod Kumar, you can take around 8-9 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chandrasekhar. Firstly, I would like to congratulate IIT Madras Research Park as well as ISA for organizing this energy festival. I think it's one of a kind of a festival for energy. So in that context, festival greetings to my moderator, co-panelist and the audience for taking your time on the weekend. As the moderator rightly mentioned, I would focus on Australia's re-emergence into climate change agenda and some of the financing, and more focused on the government funding and financing aspects. Yeah, so I would divide this into three different topics. The first, quickly, I give an highlight on the Australian energy scenario, quickly touch upon it to give an idea about it. And then the climate change targets that Australia has announced very recently. What are the some of the funding and financing options that has been announced? And what is it with the context of Australia-India relationship? If you look at the Australia's energy scenario, the total installed capacity is close to 85 gigawatt, out of which the 20% is from renewables, and the 60% is from coal in terms of electricity that has been generated. The estimation is Australia will be moving towards around 30 to 32% of renewables by 2030. With reference to the climate change target, the reason I said the Australia's re-emergence into the climate changes, the last 10 years, it wasn't at the forefront from a climate change perspective. With the new Labour Party government coming in May 2022, the new government is very aggressive in terms of our climate change targets. They have increased the targets to 43% by 2030 from what it was before. Although the estimated climate change emission reduction is 30 to 35% by 2030, the reason they have kept 43% is an accelerated in terms of deployment of green energy. So this was the signing ceremony that was done in June 2022 with the new Prime Minister and the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. So we are looking at a net zero emissions by 2050, and all the plans are in place to achieve this particular target. So from coming to the funding, government funding on this, so just last week, 25th of October, the government made the announcements in the budget. So we are looking at close to 20 billion investments for rewiring the nation program, which is to primarily upgrade the Australia's electricity grid, including the 6 billion worth of projects, which has subsea in terms of a link between the Victoria and the Tasmanian states. We are also looking at investments into Victoria's renewable energy zones as well as offshore wind energy, and through the concessional financing program of 1.5 billion. The second announcement that is made is around close to 2 billion for powering the region's fund program, which is primarily to looking at decarbonizing some of those regional industries of aluminum, steel, and chemical manufacturing. We also have around 275 million towards the investment for electric and hydrogen vehicle infrastructure. We would looking at an hydrogen highways initiative, which will establish hydrogen refueling stations across Australia's busiest flight routes in partnership with states. And then we would also have a community level batteries. I think that is also would be emerging. Close to 400 batteries will be coming in the next few years. And the carbon capture and storage, which over the period of 10 years, the investment will be around close to 141 million. And then for the hydrogen hub, which has been identified across Australia, the Townsville will come first in the rank, and we're looking at close to 72 million investments for that. So this would give in terms of an intention by the new government, which is looking at pro-green energy, and the level of commitment they're looking at for the climate change. With reference to the Australia-India collaboration, I think it started in 2020 during the virtual summit between both the prime ministers. They have signed a comprehensive strategic partnership, which is an elevation of a bilateral relationship. And then with the formation of Quad, and then we add the Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, which was signed on April 2nd of April 2022. This is will come into effect by very soon. This is under the parliamentary approval process. Once it is approved, this will come into effect. And we are looking at close to 90 to 95% of Indian products exported to Australia on a duty-free once it comes into effect. So that will open up multiple in terms of trade opportunities in this space. And the Australian government has also commissioned India Economic Strategy, a document from a country perspective for engaging with Asian country from a long-term perspective. And energy is one of those core areas that has been identified. We have also signed a letter of intent with the Ministry of MNRE, looking at ultra-low-cost solar as well as the clean hydrogen. In addition to it, we are also looking at some of those programs of innovation network, which would predominantly looking at scale-up companies collaborating with Indian ecosystem, and including energy as one of those areas. So this is another initiative which has been taken up as a bilateral exercise, that is Australia-India Center for Energy. Kudos to IIT Madras, Professor Satya and Dr. Nikhil and his team. They are leading it along with other Indian universities and Australian universities to set up a virtual center for energy. And with this, I would pass it on to moderator.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Vinod Kumar. It was very enlightening for you to really elaborate on the Indo-Australian, trade association benefits that the countries can actually enjoy. At the same time, what the Australian government is actually trying to do in terms of, supporting the transition, because ultimately what we are looking at is the energy transition, which is going to be very challenging. And from a, coal-based or a fossil fuel-based economy to a renewable-based economy, I think the transition is going to be very, very painful. And the commitments from Paris Agreement, which are actually not coming forward, are something which are very painful for all the developing nations, including loss of technology, which is a real challenge. So moving on from there, I think the next speaker is Mr. Madhavan. So please briefly introduce yourself, and maybe you can take around 8-9 minutes. And he will speak on both solar and startup financing as well as growth equity financing, which is very critical for India to really move to the next level. We already seen so many unicorns in India, but as Mr. Larry Fink has said, the next 1,000 unicorns will be from the new energy sector. So I think some of the important points probably we can learn from his presentation is to look at startup financing. Mr. Madhavan, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chandrasekhar. So about myself, okay, this event is more of a industry academia collaboration. Right from day one, that's what we've been hearing. So I kind of represent both sides. The one side, I've been in the energy sector for the last 20 years, working in fossil fuel industry, and the last 10 years, correct? Okay. Am I audible? Okay, so I'm right now on both sides of the table. On the one side, I've been working in the industry for several years, and the last 12 years I've been working in solar and other renewable technologies, as well as on energy efficiency. On the energy efficiency side, mainly for industrial consumers. On the academia side, I'm also a part-time student at IIT Madras. I'm doing my PhD in the Department of Management Studies, and my PhD is about sustainable finance. So that gives me, so my perspective, I'm trying to distill both sides of it, my experience as well as what I'm learning from academic research. So before I get into the slides, just want a quick show of hands. I have 3 questions. So how many of you have no finance background? I'm assuming that there's mostly engineers, so I won't expect a lot of people to know much about finance, so just to understand the audience. Okay, probably okay. And okay, so, okay, second question, how many of you here are entrepreneurs? Startups, entrepreneurs, IT incubated entrepreneurs? Okay, quite a few. And how many of you want to become entrepreneurs? Okay. So because my topic is covering these 3 areas, and of course, energy is already, that is by default, that is understood, the climate part is understood. So I'll try to address some of the questions you may have, all the three type of people in this audience. So my talk, before I get into I'll start my discussion with a quote. So this guy is one of the most powerful guys in the world. Many of you may not know, if you're not in the finance industry, you may not know much about him. So this guy is like, called the king of Wall Street or king of finance, and he his company manages more than almost 10 trillion assets. So just to give an idea, can someone say what is the GDP of India? Annual GDP of India? Yeah, something like 3 trillion. Only 2 countries have more assets or better GDP than BlackRock, which is US and China. And these guys basically set, along with Vanguard and a couple of others, so they set the entire industry, the standard for the industry. So what he said is, last year, he said that decarbonizing the global economy is going to be the greatest investment opportunity of our lifetime. So which means that there's a lot of money that's going to flow into the sector. Of course, there is some blowback from the status quo, but nonetheless, when Larry Fink says that, it is bound to happen. And the second is, again, for especially for startups. So he also said that the next 1,000 unicorns will be from the clean tech space or climate tech space. So which means that, once again, there is a lot of money that's going to flow, provided there are some conditions are met. So we'll look at it over the course of the presentation. So what I will do is I will talk a little bit about what is climate finance and climate tech, and some of the trends and some practical things which I learned from the industry, which I've been involved in raising some funds for some of the renewable energy and energy efficiency projects, what I learned there, and also something else, some of the other experiences. Okay, so let's start with the definition. What is climate finance? So the UNFCCC, which is organizing the COP27 tomorrow in Egypt. So the climate finance is one of the key topics, points of discussions between different countries. Like as Mr. Chandrasekhar said just a while back, again, this transition requires a lot of money, and it has to come from, so there is a big question, okay, developing nations are going to emit a lot, but where is the money going to come from? So that kind of discussion is going to happen in the next 4-5 days if you're going to follow the news. It's happening in Egypt. So basically the definition of it is like, it's about, okay, it's in simple terms, it is the money. Where is the money going to come from in the entire decarbonization? So, and broadly, there are two areas where the money has to flow in. One is for mitigation, the climate change mitigation. The other is one from adaptation. So some people have already given up on mitigation because it's at the current rate, at the current political will is not there to meet the Paris goals. So let us not focus on adaptation. But then there are some optimists and some pessimists, but broadly it is about mitigation and adaptation. And for those who are not very familiar with finance, so okay, this is again this common to finance. So basically, you have equity and you have debt. And if you look at on the debt side, I think it's some of my the speakers who follow me will be speaking more on that. So you have loans and bonds, and you have green bonds, green loans, sustainability linked bonds, and all the stuff, which are debt instruments which can help this green transition. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk more on the equity, that is just VC and PE perspectives, or funds that have been from a startup and equity fundraising perspective. So what is climate tech? Again, simple terms, it's about technologies that will help in reducing GHG emissions. So the image on the right side, it is taken from a PwC report. It talks about the different types of, verticals and horizontals, like which are the horizontals which contribute to climate change, mitigation or adaptation. And then you have on the verticals, which are industry agnostic, which is the capture, GST capture and stuff, which we spoke about in the last few days. And of course, there is a management and reporting, which our keynote speaker spoke on the first day about reporting, management and reporting. And this is also something which Professor Junjunwala talked about in the first day, about the 0 to 5, 5 to 10, and 10 to 15 kind of thing. So look at on the right-hand side is the ones, the technologies are the most mature ones, the solar, wind, and stuff. And on the other side, what we had earlier this morning, we had a session on hydrogen. So this is kind of the innovation hype curve. They call this innovation hype curve. And we are at so many of the technologies that we spoke over the last 3 days are in different, on the different points on this curve. So now coming to a very quick overview about climate tech. So good news is the investments into climate tech has been growing after a brief pause during the COVID days, but now it has been growing again. And if you look at last year, so this is about 87 billion of investments went into startups. This is a global picture, and there are about 78 unicorns as at the time of the report, which means that we are a long way from the 1,000 unicorns that Larry Fink spoke about. So which is an opportunity, and I'm assuming that many of them will be coming from this campus. And the next one is also, this is a little bit, okay, I'll skip this part. Basically, this says again about where the money is already going, which of the technologies are underfunded, and which are still at a nascent stage. So some of them like nuclear or CCS and agriculture, all these are nascent, but a lot of money is flowing into solar and mobility. So I'll just go back again. So here, if you look at it, most of the money in the last year has gone into mobility, e-mobility and transport. And the next one was the food, agriculture, and land use. And third one was energy. Energy is kind of a mature, so it is more of a PE game and less of a VC game. And when it comes to India, if you look at it, most of the money, again, this is a mix of PE and VC funds. Most of the money has gone into renewables. And a little bit, the second biggest one quarter went into electric mobility. So kind of following the global trend. And then there are a lot of big tail, a lot of money gone into different sectors. Overall, last year, according to this report by Unitas Capital, the money quadrupled from 1.87 to 7 billion. So coming to specifically about renewable energy investments, I'm talking about India, the solar and wind and stuff. So it's most of the, again, there was a jump, but the money that went into was about 14 billion. And out of which, if you look at it, equity played a very small part on the right side. Most of it was either M&A acquisition or bonds and debts fixed in, so it was more of that. That is because it's, again, a very mature thing and it's project-based. There is not much of a product-based, it's a project-based, which I'll explain a little later in the slide. Okay, so that's the next slide. So coming from more from a startup perspective, so there are, if you look at the money flow, so one is a product-type startups and there are project-type startups. So when I say product type, which are the ones, these are the deep tech, many of you must be working on this, where there's a lot of R&D involved, a lot of unproven, and the product is high risk, which requires high risk capital coming from VCs or early stage investors. Whereas on the project side, there are many project developers who are building megawatt scale plants or gigawatt plants. They are not doing, they are more of integrators. So they are using proven technology, and they mostly get the patient capital or the pension funds and or banks, major banks and commercial banks, not even development banks, mostly commercial banks. They invest in these kind of things. And they are predominantly cash flow driven. So they have to securitize the cash flow and get the funding. And when it comes to challenges to venture funding, especially for startups who are involved in the so-called deep tech innovation, the entire Silicon Valley or the VC model is based on rapid scaling. So they are built for most from, at least their origins are from software. So they look at how quickly you can build a product, how quickly you can scale it, and probably about 6, 7, or 8 years later, how quickly they can exit. So that is a pretty simple model where they are looking at marginal, almost zero marginal cost of building the extra product. Unfortunately, that is not how the deep tech, the so-called deep tech works, and especially clean tech is a pure deep tech where hardware is involved. The life cycles are very long. R&D tech can take 3, 4 years, and from there to reach a revenue, it can take a similar long time. So this makes it quite difficult for traditional VCs to come in and invest. And again, even if some startup reaches there, then there is also the so-called valley of death. So you have to cross that if you have to be a really successful company. So that capital is still a challenge. So whereas when it comes to the other side, which is the project funding, which is more of you build a project, you have your technology, or now you're deploying it, where the risk comes from, again, I think this part will be spoken by the speakers who come after me. So there they look at technology, and this part is relatively easier because everything is much more mature and stuff. So yeah, so this is the broadly what I wanted to share. Of course, I'll take questions later on.
Thank you, Madhavan. It is important to understand how the equity money is actually flowing and where it is going in terms of the investment, so that the effort can be channelized to basically ensure that the sector really improves in terms of technology deployment. At the same time, projects do really come up to ensure that we really move towards a clean and greener world. Our next speaker is Mr. Sushil Monoth. Mr. Monoth has large experience as a banker. He's been a MD with Bank of India. He's been an MD with SIDBI. He has been an executive director with IDBI Capital Markets. And when I was talking to him yesterday, he had some different ideas in terms of how India can move towards, a large sector financing role and, a bank funding or a bank guarantee sort of a structure, which can actually help in terms of, the bank funding really coming through. And I would like Mr. Monoth to really, express his views. You can take around 10 minutes for that. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, very good morning. And I must thank IIT first of all, for organizing such an important conference. And the important session, of course, of climate finance, I think is the brainchild of Mr. Chandrasekhar, who said that, yes, we must look at climate finance also. So I'll just quickly run through the initial slides, and then we can go into more details at the latest. Steps to achieve net zero. Of course, 3 pillars: adopting innovative technologies and practices, then arranging finance, which is the second part, and the third is enabling a just transition. So these are the 3 important pillars if you want to go ahead on this path. Technologies, I will not take up much time because, okay, it will change the huge market. I am looking at climate not as a challenge alone, but it is also an opportunity. I think we should be looking at climate equally as an opportunity because the whole industrial landscape will change because of going in for net zero technology. So it will going to be a multi-trillion-dollar market which can come up. And the areas are like electrifying transportation, building industry, launching in agriculture, remaking power grids. Because I'd like to go a little faster only. Delivering on green hydrogen, we have already done that. Expanding carbon capture use, which we had today, discussion. And then added one more, developing circular economy. So now the financing requirement, let's come to that directly. A high-level policy commission had been set up earlier, which did a study for getting Asia to net zero. And if India achieves the net zero by 2070, as we have at least committed ourselves currently, it will boost our annual GDP by 4.7%. By 36, create additional jobs. And the most important is it will need about USD 10 trillion in cumulative investments. McKinsey also collaborates on that. So you require $10 trillion of investment. As Mr. Chandrasekhar was saying that, where do you get this money from? And this is the kind of money where India's GDP is what, around $3 trillion? Oh, okay, financing, is it on that? Yeah, who should finance? Now, where do you get the money? Who should finance it? So contributions of countries to climate change and their capacity to prevent and cope with the consequences, it varies enormously. So this is the major principle based on which the principle of common but differentiated liability was devised, wherein we know that developed countries have done most of the emissions and they need to pay for both actual loss and damage as well as mitigation and adaptation. But then that has been what we have been talking of all along. On the demand side, as a friend from the VC side said, yes, the unclear market size, growth rates, how serious countries are in achieving these goals, early stage of technologies, different maturity levels, and there is a lack of clarity on what kind of product characteristics are required, competencies, facilities and all. So all these issues are there which are making it difficult for the bankers to come up, and which is of course given a lot of opportunity to venture capital to get in and take up something things. On the supply side, let us see the financing issues. Development finance is inadequate. International funding agencies, we have several, but then the total requirement of fund is much larger, they can do much less. And the commitment from the developed countries, it's not forthcoming as desired, because they've been already saying, but then it has never been coming as yet. So, a G20, they did an independent review. Now, how do you do, scale up this development finance? So they did an independent review of the multilateral development banks, that's the World Bank and others, Asian Development Bank, and then that they found that the capital adequacy framework there is such that their policies currently are very conservative than their charters permit, and there is a headroom for 4 times more lending while safeguarding their financial integrity. Now, this is a very important recommendation which came out from that is that today they are lending, very, very, very conservatively. And in fact, I think the other day, 4 or 5 days back, our finance minister I read in the papers, she has said that they are in the G20 presidency, which we are going to have it now from the next year onwards, they are going to ask the World Bank and others to be more liberal in financing, and especially for climate and education technologies. So the MD, and in addition to that, an MDB Challenge Fund has been created by Rockefeller Foundation for new ideas to help these MDBs efficiently use their resources. So can we use that? How can we do it? Now, if we are able to increase this as per the G20 study, then billions of dollars will be unlocked in terms of financing for climate finance by the multilateral development banks. So that is one way where we can get it, and maybe India will take up this in this next year. International Finance Facility was also suggested in a meeting when Rockefeller Foundation had a total, ideas approach from all the financial people around the world. So they felt that this can use to leverage grants from official donors, philanthropies, and official guarantees. All these 3 things together with the money which is coming from the MDBs, they can create a large volume, much more larger volume of investments which can be done by using this as a support base. And they have recommended use of guarantees, new instruments. Similarly, developed nations which have a scope of giving about $100 billion of SDRs, special drawing rights, which IMF has, and they can use these SDRs to give up this money to the developing countries in terms of climate finance. So the requirement is today, G20 can implement this MDB report early to get the money. That's on the international level. Now, what we can do in India is, we can introduce, of course, always a carbon tax. I think the time is coming very soon for it. Then we can give more incentives to facilitate larger investments in financially viable projects. Like banks and others are going to be more into the financially viable projects. But if some more incentives are available, maybe larger amounts can come up. And that is why India has done this, that we have an RE policy, we have hydrogen policy, we have an EV policy. All these are there. And of course, there is one example of commercial use, that IIT itself, Petros Research Park, is doing it in terms of using the solar. And another important area is entering the climate alliance to attract investments. Mr. Jayant Sinha, in his, one of his lectures, he is the head of Parliamentary Committee on Finance. And he has suggested that India should enter the climate alliance by maybe committing to certain climate goals and targets and bargaining in return certain investments from there. So I think this is what would be the agenda probably for this year. How do we leverage some more of private finance? Because development finance is only limited and we need more and more money. So how do we get some private finance money also? Today, as we have seen, the current approach is dominated by the capital market focus on instruments. Mainly it is your debt, it is equity, or all other, no, bonds are also there, green bonds and other kinds. So all are kind of variations of the debt currently which are there in practice. And of course, they carry the same risk. So now what can we do? If we can look at some different structures of financing, then maybe we'll be able to get more of private sector finance. So it could be possible to promote blended finance, which is a mix of loan and guarantees to take care of risk perception of private, domestic and international investors. Risk perception we can take care of by taking care of that risk amount, the expected loss which can be there or the risk which is there. If some agency can take care of that, some small part, then maybe we can expect to get larger amount of private finance into the system. And for this kind of an institution, the government, the MDBs, the philanthropies, the corporate sector through CSR, they can all pitch in with the capital. A large amount of capital can also come in through these segments. Now, so I am suggesting therefore that maybe India could create a green transition credit guarantee fund. All along worldwide there is a talk of creating a green climate bank, but I believe that maybe it will be better to set up in India a green transition credit guarantee fund. This kind of a fund which will be on the lines of credit guarantee trust for micro and small enterprises. See, today we are already having a kind of a guarantee fund which provides guarantee to all the primary lending institutions, the banks, NBFCs, so that they can provide collateral-free loans to the micro and small enterprises. So it is taking away the risk from the banker's perspective in terms of what is the expected loss or what is the NPAs and what can be the loss available. So that risk is being taken over by this bank, and which is why they don't buy this guarantee fund, which is why they don't have to insist on the collaterals for that purpose. So this guarantee which is being given currently is about 50 to 80% of the amount in default, subject to certain maximum limits. A guarantee fee of 1% of the outstanding loan and a small service fee paid. So this guarantee fee is like an insurance premium you are paying in terms that yes, if any risk is there, this risk will be covered by the fund. So banks are much more happier to give this money. So risk-based pricing has also been introduced for PLIs now. You will find that the aggregate guarantees given by the CGM up till now has been about 2.6 lakh crores. So it has been quite a successful model which has been proven in 65 lakh cases. And we can leverage an outstanding guarantee of about 12 to 15 times the capital. Which means that if you have a capital of say 20,000 crores, you can almost leverage kind of 3 lakh crores in funding, total funding can be there. And that could be a little safer also for the banks to or the private sector to come in and invest in this. And these kind of organizations are existing in Japan, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Korea, etc. quite a lot. And they are also here in India. It is more of a government-oriented guarantee system which is there. But outside there is a commercial also. This is a commercial system as well in terms of the money is paid by through the premium. Just like we have our own insurance premium. And from the premium only all the people are paid off. No, anyone who makes a claim. So once we look at that, if we can create this kind of a fund, and this fund can have this 15-20,000 crores of money, and it can then catalyze an investment much larger in terms of from the private sector by way of providing either a guarantee for the loan, or it can also be a first loss guarantee. So where you can say that, okay, if my expected loss is say 5%, 7%, if you provide a first loss guarantee for 7%, then there is a much easier possibility for all the entire private sector to come in and finance more and more on that. So conclusions are large finance needed for this. Development funding can be from MDBs, UN funds, IMF, developed countries, etc. All of them. Developed countries we need to pay on the basis of the polluter to pay principle. Extensive private capital required can be leveraged through blended finance. And we can create an exclusive GTCGF with capital from government, philanthropies, MDBs, private sector, and developed nations contributions. So all that can come together and we can try and leverage it at least 12 to 15 times to be able to get more money. Finally, we have left out the third pillar. First pillar was technology, second pillar was finance, and the third pillar was a just transition. So in just transition, because as our earlier speakers had said, that there will be a lot of problem for those people who have been engaged in coal-based companies and they have to now move to something else. So now how do we get a just transition? So I'm just leaving you with some food for thought that while India can move on the path to decarbonization using possible carbon tax revenues to fund green investments, leveraging international support, including for blended finance, would free up the domestic finance for development, poverty reduction, and management of the negative social impacts which are going to be there of all of this. So this is just a food for thought, and we can always think that how we should go about it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Munot, for a detailed, elaborative presentation on how we can create financing structures, for decarbonization. Our next speaker is Mr. Aman Hans. He's got large experience in domestic markets as well as international markets, and he has been associated with climate finance, climate risk related areas. So I would like to throw, his experience and share his insights into, how climate risk versus credit risk actually can be a very, painful point from a lending perspective, how it can actually impact projects and, share his international experience. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm delighted to be here. As I just realized, most of the audience, they don't have the finance background. I would first like to just set a context and give an overview of what really climate finance is and how it's been evolving. Starting with the point, as Mr. Deo out here had highlighted, sir had highlighted, that so finance is all about, the basic premise of finance is, as we all know, is about risk-adjusted returns and certainty of cash flows. Now, as sir highlighted that till very recent, till I would say 2017, there was no mature market regulatory framework globally for climate change, and which was a major risk for financiers to come forward. And that was the reason predominantly across the world, we just had project financing happening, and followed by public-private partnership. And I've personally been very fortunate because over the last 10 years in my career, I started my career with banking, then SBI Capital Markets, and moved to Niti Aayog, where I was leading the public-private partnership, and decided to move overseas for educating myself into climate finance and working also. And I've seen this evolution of the market. So initially, as I said, it was all about project financing because there was no certainty about regulatory. So anybody who's investing into the projects had to have a PPA being backed or a public-private partnership kind of a framework. And as also Mr. Madhavan also highlighted, these were the technologies which were in the mature stage of the curve, the hype curve so-called. But now how the things have changed. So earlier, the first regulatory framework the world came up with was a Kyoto Protocol, but which wasn't really implemented in the letter and spirit. It was only after the Paris Accord that the world has really taken climate change very seriously and come to a conclusion or has accepted the fact that now there's no looking back. And what is really changing after that is that these NDCs that we are announcing in the COP26 or the all the COP events being held are now actually being accepted as laws in the country, being implemented as laws. The global alliances are coming forward, laying standards, regulatory frameworks. The regulators across the world, be it SEC in US, which is the security regulator, in UK, in Japan, they all have come forward and mandated their listed entities to disclose climate-related risk, which I'll touch upon in the due course, and also the greenhouse gas emission. So we really have to understand the climate change firstly, it's an exogenous factor for any business. What is an exogenous? It's not really impacting your cash flows directly. It's not an OPEX for your business. When I say exogenous, there has to be a strong regulatory, which is the public policy support, and a societal pressure has to be there for climate change and climate finance to really evolve. Given that, now that we have a regulatory framework, what is happening at this stage is climate risk is being considered as a very pivotal appraisal criteria for any sort of a financing across the world. So recently my last stint was with Goldman Sachs, where I was working in the private equity arm there. And as one of the leading institutions in the world, they have mandated across their asset class that first, as much as we do the importance we lay to the credit appraisal, similar importance has to be given to the climate risk appraisal also. And what is climate risk appraisal? We have two verticals. One is the physical risk and one is the transitional risk. Physical risk is typically because of the climate change happening, typhoons, cyclones. What is the impact on a supply chain of any company? So if a factory is hit by a typhoon, what will be the impact on my entire supply chain and thus my cash flows of the company? So that is a risk. It's a probability event which over the course of the period and going forward is expected to, the probability is expected to increase and thus is the expected loss. What is a transitory risk? Transitory risk is the carbon tax, the expected carbon tax which the world is supposed to levy. It's the increase in the cost of capital. Now, today, if you compare two firms listed at the same stock exchange, operating in the same market, same sector, one is committed for, let's say, a net zero, which is science-based target aligned, and the other one hasn't. Clearly, the cost of the capital of the latter is higher, which is the firm which hasn't committed to net zero. So there is a clear premium being given by the market towards such, towards the former firms which have actually agreed to net zero. The same is the case not just with the corporates, but with sovereign entities also. So for example, a country like, I would say, Bangladesh, for example, has a high physical climate risk being built into their sovereign bonds, the yield of the sovereign bonds. While on the other hand, we have countries like Saudi Arabia and Middle East, which have a high transitory risk, because tomorrow, given the technology disruption, change to cleaner energy, they have a transitory risk, which is being built into their sovereign yield. So all these factors today are really driving. I would also like to touch upon what is creating the demand for climate risk. As I said, a lot of companies, countries are committing to net zero. And earlier, what the biggest problem after committing to net zero was information asymmetry, or there was no standardized mechanism of believing in the credentials of this commitment. But now the scenario has really changed. We have SBTi framework, we have greenhouse gas protocol, we have accounting standards, not the climate, the ESG standards today, which has been laid. So there is a very standardized mechanism and communication channel which is now emerging. So which can be audited, which can be verified on the ground. And because of all these reasons, as the companies are committing to net zero, we all know that there are three buckets for emissions: scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Till now, it was only about scope 1 and scope 2. What is scope 1? Again, for those who don't know, scope 1 is the emission directly caused by an entity due to its operations. Scope 2 is the electricity, indirect emissions caused by the electricity sourced. Scope 3 is the emission caused by the supply chains. Now, how the opportunities are emerging is because in the scope 1, the companies which are committing to net zero are actually hiving off their non-core business, which is polluting generating. For example, if I'm a manufacturing company and I have loads of trucks which are diesel run, I want to hive them off and outsource those things, because then from the scope 1, it goes to scope 3. So these kind of new business model across the world are emerging, where people, the companies want to focus on their core business, green them in order to get premium from the market. Why this premium is being given? Because of the climate risk factor, which appraisal which I have highlighted. And also at this stage, going forward it may change, but it is also to a major extent because of the reputation of the large corporates. There's a huge societal pressure. If you see in the last 2 years, the kind of the litigations which are happening, climate-related litigations across the world, NGOs, corporate individuals are filing PILs against any sort of environmental-related concerns that they have. Environmental racism is something which is taking off as a major issue across the world today. So these are all risks which are emerging, and the companies are very cautious. And thus, given this regulatory framework, given the certainty in which we are emerging from project finance, now we are entering into an era where standalone equity investments are being made into new technology disruptions. Because again, as I highlighted for scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, different business models, different technologies. For scope 1, there are companies which are coming and saying, okay, I'll invest into energy efficiency for your buildings, because that will generate a premium for you. For scope 2, aggregation models for that we'll 10 companies will combine and we'll source clean energy together from certain grid. And similarly for scope 3, how scope 3 is impacting a country like India, because India comes in the supply chain of most of these global manufacturers or traders. And if India as a country doesn't react, or all these the companies are not poised to take advantage of this climate change that is happening. Of course, I saw in a presentation very recent that India will lose out on so much of exports, because these exports will shift to other countries where the companies are well poised to take advantage and their supply chains are clean and they fit into the scope 3 criteria. So all these dynamics together are really driving climate finance, and it's an extremely evolving field, extremely challenging field. There's a lot to learn, and just sharing my experience with all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Aman, for elaborate explanation on climate risk point of view. And it is important to really understand as to how this is getting built into the business models and how it is going to really impact the credibility of various companies in the coming days. Our next speaker is Mr. Vidyashankar Subramaniam. He is from SBI Capital Markets with large experience in infrastructure and debt funding, so including sustainable bonds. I would like to ask him to give his presentation in terms of and elaborate how we can actually raise different kinds of money through debt markets. Yeah, Mr. Vidyashankar.
So good afternoon all. I know, so first I would like to thank IIT Research Park and IESA for organizing such a event which combines the academia with the industry as such. And I know that you have been, in the last 3 days, a lot of technical sessions have been conducted to enrich your technical expertise. And I actually would like to thank IESA to take this session also on finance, which I think is a new topic for you, but is a critical topic, because at the end of the day, when a technology is going to be commercialized, so it has to be funded. So finance is to be considered as a critical part of technology evolution also. So given said that, now the topic is on climate finance. So I would like to just take you through. I would not bore you for a long time, but I would like to just impart the critical aspects of climate finance and why it's important for technology. Yeah, so now this is just a background, like why climate finance has come into play now. So going back to the industrialization era, so which had happened like a few decades ago. So this led to uncontrolled emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And all you know, so you are a technical people, so you would understand that the impact of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is leading to a temperature increase. So when a comparison was done, so the climate has increased the temperature by almost 1.7 degrees when compared to the pre-industrialization levels. And because of this increase in temperature, so there are a lot of issues which are coming. Say, as my colleagues also had highlighted during their discussion, so the polar ice caps are melting, there is a hole in the ozone layer, the rising sea levels. So eventually cities are located, many of the cities are also located on the seashores. So this also has to be given a thought when considering the climate impact on the economy as such. And unseasonal rains, floodings, drought. So these are some of the critical issues which are developing because of the uncontrolled emission of greenhouse gases. So at some point in time, we have to kind of restrict it and reduce it and go towards net zero. And again, as said, we cannot put a full stop immediately on a immediate basis. So it has to be evolved over a period of time. So that transition time that we have is very limited, as in the morning discussion where Sir also had pointed out. So now, so there has been a lot of measures taken by the United Nations and the globe, all the countries in the globe per se, towards the environmental impact of these greenhouse gases and how to mitigate those measures. So this started with 1992 when UNFCCC was actually formed, and that was the first Earth Summit wherein all the countries participated, and they identified that there is something called climate change which is happening and it has to be addressed. And after 5 years, 97, so the Kyoto Protocol was made into effect to give effect to the Earth Summit, which was done 5 years before, because no transition was happening during the 5 years. And in the same year, actually, something called GRI, which is General Reporting Initiative, which came, which also, apart from the environmental aspects, so there are two other aspects which were considered in that, which is the social and the governance aspect. So put together, this is called ES and G. So environmental, social, and governance aspect. So which is one of the recent in the finance part of it. So ESG is something which is gaining criticality in terms of the funding also. And subsequently, the CDP, which is the Carbon Disclosure Program, had also come into play. And in 2015, the Paris Agreement, so here the foundation was laid wherein the developed countries would try to provide some financial assistance to the developing countries to address the climate-related issues which are happening in these countries. And subsequently, the TCFD was a framework which enabled a reporting of the climate-related issues in a financial form, so that the countries are made aware of what is the impact of the technology changes which are bringing into the atmosphere and how is it going to impact the society at large. And so this was like in the last COP. So there are COP, which is the Conferences of Parties. Basically, it's an organization of all the countries put together to discuss on the climate-related issues. And there has been 26 COPs already happened, and 27th, as my colleague also said, is happening in Egypt a few days from now. And in the last COP, so India had committed to 5 critical improvement measures. So they are called Panchamrit. So the first one is with respect to 500 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel-based energy generation. And the second one was 50% of the energy requirement to be sourced from renewable energy sources, and all these by 2030 was the targeted deadline. And also a reduction of the total projected carbon emission by 1 billion tons by 2030, and the carbon intensity of the economy to be reduced by almost 45% when compared to a 2005 level. So what was the emission in 2005 vis-a-vis in 2030? So that has to be reduced by about 45%. And last is to achieve the net zero emission by 2070. And say again, the importance of this financing as part of the session is that ultimately, in order to implement these objectives, so sustainable development is what is required. So you have to develop, but in a way that is sustainable and you can go on for a long period of time. So that is where this financing is coming into play. And again, about climate finance, my colleague has already explained. So there are 2 things which are to be critically noted. One is the mitigation of the issues which are arising due to climate-related changes, and how do we adapt to those issues which are arising due to the climate-related changes. So this is because a lot of finance is required for both mitigation and for adaptation. For example, I have given generation of renewable power would fall under the mitigation of the climate-related issues, whereas the flood protection measures or developing drought resilient food crops. So these are the aspects which are addressing the adaptation of the changes due to the climate related issues. And again, funding from the, as I was discussing, so there was a funding commitment from developed countries to the developing countries. So this was supposed to be to the tune of 100 billion per year, but as the speakers were also saying, so that kind of commitment of fund flow has not happened, and still the targets have been elongated by another 5 years. But despite that, the funds are not flowing to the expected level. So this is actually leading to a backdraw of the things which were supposed to be done are now getting elongated. So the time that we are left with to address these issues are becoming shorter. So that is something which is to be taken on a serious note. And yeah, so coming to finance basically. So as my other colleague also was saying, so infrastructure finance or project finance is basically for generally for a long duration projects, and typically a project life of over 20 years in case of power generation or road projects per se. And in some cases it can go up to 50 or 60 years, wherein you develop a dam or an airport or a transmission infrastructure for that matter. And when it comes to RBI, so RBI has classified various infrastructure under 5 different sets. So energy is one of the critical head under the RBI's classification. The other heads being transport, water sanitation, communication, and social and commercial infrastructure, which are also falling under the definition of RBI's classification of infrastructure. And this is about the characteristics of the infrastructure financing projects. So one is that the infrastructure which is being developed is used by the public at large. So either it can be directly or it can also be indirectly used by the public, but it is for the public benefit the infrastructure is being developed. And typically these projects are of long duration, as we discussed in the last slide. Say it can be 20 years to 50, 60 years also. And there has to be a defined revenue stream, because say banks generally participate at the later part of the technology, wherein the technology has been developed and commercialized, and further revenue streams are being developed through that technology. So only, yeah, sure. And again, so typically the projects are funded 70:30. So 70% of the funds are coming from debt, which is banks and all, and 30% is coming from equity. So that is for project finance. So these are the general ratios which are there. And as far as the debt is concerned, so funding can be from banks, NBFCs, infrastructure finance companies, multilateral agencies, bonds, and ECB. So this slide I would just try to put in what SBI as a bank has in place towards renewable finance. So there are a lot of policies which have been put up internally to specific sectors like renewable. They have a specific policy for solar project financing, wind project financing, biomass, small hydro. So these are some separate policies which have been put in place. And being the largest bank in India, so in the last 10 to 15 years, a total cumulative financing of around 32,000 crore has been done towards energy side of it, and majority towards the solar funding, so which is around 19,000 crore. So this much of debt funding has been provided by State Bank alone. Leave apart the other banks and other institutions and other debt measures which I had told. And also, so SBI being the largest bank, they also raise green lines from various multilateral agencies, and like World Bank, KfW, EIB, etc. So cumulative funding of around 2 billion plus has been raised so far. And again, one of the targets being to reach 500 gigawatt of solar renewable by 2030. The funding requirement, the debt funding alone is expected to be around 13.5 lakh crores. We are talking big numbers here. And so this is the last couple of slides which I have. There is something called sustainability linked loans and bonds which have developed in the recent years. So when you mean sustainability linked loan, so there is one additional, apart from a regular financing angle, so one additional factor has been considered, wherein so the funding, the rate of interest at which the loans are provided are basically linked to one additional parameter of sustainability performance target. So when I mean sustainability performance target, so these can be targets like reduction in the carbon emission by the company which is taking that loan or bond, reduction in the water usage, waste generation, So these are some of the targets which can be set by the company. So when a company goes to get a sustainability linked loan, so they say that, so these are the four core principle of a sustainability linked loans. So one is you select what is the target that you want to focus on. You set a predefined time-based performance target for achieving those goals, and you also measure and report what performance improvement you have been able to do. And also, so it is not only that you declare it from yourself, it has to be also independently reviewed and certified. So these four aspects are the underlying principles for sustainability linked loans. And as I said, the loans, the rate of interest are generally lower when compared to a commercial loan which is available because of the sustainability angle which is put into that. And these are some examples of various Indian companies, corporates which have raised various sustainability linked loans and bonds. So Ultratech was the first of the Indian companies to raise around 400 million in Feb 21. And the target set by Ultratech was to reduce the carbon emission for every ton of cement that they produce by around 22.2% by FY30 when compared to the FY17 levels which they were actually using. And this got a very good response. So it was subscribed 7 times. So it had an oversubscription of 7 times. And so that was the first in India. And followed by that, Adani Electricity. So they also went for raising USD 2 billion in sustainability linked bonds. And it was oversubscribed 9 times, over 9 times. And here the target set by Adani was they have to procure more of renewable sources. So currently they were only procuring 3% of their total power of renewable. And now they wanted to increase it to 30% by 23 and 60% by 27. And similarly, JSW Steel and L&T Finance have also subsequently raised funding in similar aspects. And so this is my last slide. So I would like to conclude by saying that it's a very high time to focus on significant measures to be taken to combat climate change because we only have this earth for us to live and for our generations to come to enjoy. So we have to be taking more actions which mitigate all these issues which are coming from climate finance. So at the end of the day, effective collaboration of technology and finance is required to achieve these goals. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Vidya Shankar. We would like to take a few questions from the audience, 2-3 questions quickly.
I think it was an excellent discussion. The most important is the finance. But I wanted to know from all these experts that the numbers which I think SBI proposed and others are putting looks to be a very small number than what the country requires. I don't want to spell out that number. I had done first-hand calculations. If we want to really decarbon our own energy sector, that is what is today, our GDP may not support it. So looking at the huge money which need to be invested, vis-a-vis, the unemployment which is getting created, on that aspect, how you are thinking about to, I don't think any of this was really looking at that aspect. Philosophically, it looks very sound. But the amount of money which is required is huge, huge and huge. Forget about India alone. Decarbon is a global problem. It's not that I decarbon, Nepal doesn't do, Pakistan doesn't do, I'm safe. No, it is the other aspect I'm linking also here. Let's assume finance doesn't support. Can we reduce our energy consumption? We go back, there is a big question. Do we have to go back to the Stone Age? So this is something I think should be the thought for the day. That energy transition, vis-a-vis the amount of money required, technology development requirement, and at the same time, the societal readiness. Believe it or not, only 10% or maybe much smaller than the total number of countries are really cause of this And if everyone's reached to that state, probably it is not possible. Then if I want to go back to the other state, what is the possibility and whether the finance, economics aspect, technology aspects are able to support? So this is question too.
Sir, just one comment. What numbers Vidyashankar said was basically related to, going from 100 gigawatt to say 500 gigawatt and the debt funding. Obviously, the numbers required are much more. It's very difficult for us to really calculate those numbers. But obviously, the commitments are very, very large. Maybe, Aman, if you have any comment, you can probably.
Yeah, I'll just take up Sir's first question, that how are we supposed to finance it, or being a developing economy where we have so many fiduciary duties, how can we invest so much money? Is that the question, sir, if I understand right? So being a developing economy, when we have other fiduciary duties of healthcare, malnourishment, how do we invest so much of money in the energy transition? So very recently, sir, I actually wrote an article in the World Bank blog. It's called Green Capex, a tightrope walk for India. And that's where I address the same question what you're asking. And so, of course, if you see at the total pollution numbers, the real numbers, India total cumulative pollution in the world, the greenhouse gas emission in the world, till date stands at 3% of the overall level. 3%. Although India, on a per annum basis, as of date, is the third highest emitter. But when you see the same thing at a per capita level, it is below Africa also, per capita level. But because of the size of the economy, it's a third highest emitter. So the question is, how do we get, we are not the polluters, who pays the principal, of course. But at the same time, at the same side, we also have to consider that for a country like India, the question is not just about reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. It's also about security, energy security. It's also about affordability, because clean energy is becoming increasingly affordable today. And of course, and there is an implicit, although there's no explicit cost currently, because India hasn't imposed a carbon tax currently in the country, but there's an implicit cost which is rising. What is an implicit cost? Cost of capital is rising for companies which I just highlighted, if you're not transitioning to become a green company.
Can you just conclude?
Yeah. So because the implicit cost is rising so much, the companies themselves are finding this inevitable, that they have to invest. It's become an inevitable task for not investing into clean energy. That would be my answer for this.
Yeah. Just one question from the audience. Last question from the audience.
Yeah.
Maybe I can add just one thing is,
Take half a
we
minute.
we can get international financing here. Basically, that's where we need to try, and that too private sector financing from it. Apart from the multilateral development bank, we can go for international private financing, for which we need to create the regulatory structures, the incentive mechanisms in India. So, and completely, in fact, Mr. Sinha said the 30-year rupee also should be there. We should have a forward rupee also, because then foreign investors can invest in and they can get a much more. So a lot of these things, entire preparatory network has to be prepared before we can get that kind of financing.
Just one last question from the audience. So we'll close after that.
Hello.
Yeah. Okay, the panelists for giving their valuable suggestions, and thank you all. Yeah, thank you.